Imagine a country so vast it stretched across 11 time zones, yet its people couldn't afford a loaf of bread. A royal family lived in luxury while soldiers froze on the front lines, and whispers of rebellion echoed through every factory and farm. In 1917, those whispers became a roar. What started as a protest for food would bring down an empire, create a new ideology, and divide the entire world for the next 100 years. The Russian Empire, vast, historical, and proud, had stood for centuries under the rule of the Romanov dynasty. Tsar Nicholas II believed he ruled by divine right, chosen by God himself. Yet beyond the golden halls of his winter palace, millions of peasants lived in desperate poverty. Russia was a land of extremes. Wealth for the few, starvation for the many. And when World War I erupted in 1914, the cracks in that empire began to split wide open. At first, the Tsar promised victory. Russian troops marched off to war, singing hymns to the motherland. But they were ill-equipped, poorly led, and sent to face the might of Germany's modern army. Millions died in the freezing trenches. The villages were emptied as people fled the war. Fields went untilled. And back home, hunger turned to rage. Factories in Petrograd and Moscow began to strike. Soldiers returning from the front joined the protests. The royal family was blamed for everything, for incompetence, for corruption, and for the influence of a mysterious monk named Grigory Rasputin, whose presence at court scandalized the nation. While Russia bled on the battlefield, Rasputin whispered in the ear of the Tsarina, shaping decisions that angered generals and nobles alike. When he was finally assassinated in 1916, it was already too late. The monarchy's image was shattered. By February 1917, the empire was collapsing under its own weight. The capital city of Petrograd, modern-day St. Petersburg, erupted in strikes. Women marched in the streets demanding bread. Soldiers were ordered to shoot, but instead, they joined the crowds. In a matter of days, the Tsar's government fell apart. Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. For the first time, Russia was without a czar. But the end of the monarchy was only the beginning of the chaos. In its place rose a fragile provisional government, led by liberals and moderate socialists. They promised elections, reforms, and freedom. But one decision destroyed their chance of survival. They chose to stay in World War I. The Russian people had no more blood to give. Soldiers deserted in droves, peasants seized land, and workers demanded power. The new government could not control the storm it had unleashed. In the shadows of Petrograd, another force was waiting, the Bolsheviks, a radical socialist faction led by a man who had spent years in exile, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Lenin had spent his life obsessed with revolution. Inspired by Karl Marx's ideas, he believed that history was a struggle between classes, the oppressed working class and the wealthy ruling elite. To him, the war was not a fight between nations but between exploiters and the exploited. In April 1917, with the help of the Germans who hoped he would destabilize Russia, Lenin secretly returned to Petrograd in a sealed train. When he arrived, he stepped off the platform and shouted his message to the crowd: peace, land, and bread. That slogan became the heartbeat of the revolution. Peace for soldiers, land for peasants, and bread for workers. It was simple, powerful, and irresistible. As the provisional government stumbled, Lenin and the Bolsheviks grew bolder. They promised an end to the war, the redistribution of land, and power to the Soviets, councils of workers and soldiers that had sprung up across the country. While moderate leaders debated, the Bolsheviks prepared. By October 1917, the time for debate was over. On a cold, tense night, Bolshevik forces stormed the Winter Palace, where the provisional government was meeting. The resistance was minimal. Barely a shot was fired. By dawn, Lenin stood before the Congress of Soviets and declared, "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." The world changed overnight. Russia, the land of emperors and aristocrats, became the first nation in history to be ruled by a communist government. But revolution is rarely clean. Within months, Russia descended into civil war. The country was split between the Reds, loyal to the Bolsheviks, and the whites, a mix of monarchists, liberals, and foreign-backed armies who wanted to crush communism. The United States, Britain, France, and Japan all sent troops to support the whites, hoping to strangle the revolution before it spread. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Entire cities changed hands multiple times. Villages were burned, food was confiscated, and millions died of famine and disease. The Bolsheviks, led by Leon Trotsky as commander of the Red Army, fought with ruthless efficiency. They executed deserters, crushed uprisings, and used propaganda to rally the masses. In 1921, after 4 years of bloodshed, the Reds emerged victorious. The old Russia was gone. In its place stood a new power, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. Lenin was its undisputed leader, the symbol of revolution. But even he knew that Russia was in ruins. The economy had collapsed, factories stood idle, and peasants resisted state control. To save the country, Lenin introduced the new economic policy, allowing small-scale private trade and farming. It was a compromise with reality, a temporary retreat from pure communism. Yet as Lenin's health declined, a power struggle began within the Communist Party. At the center of it stood two men: Leon Trotsky, the fiery revolutionary who believed in spreading world revolution, and Joseph Stalin, the quiet, calculating party secretary who believed in building socialism within one country. When Lenin died in 1924, a fierce battle for succession erupted. Stalin, through cunning alliances and manipulation, outmaneuvered his rivals. He portrayed himself as Lenin's loyal disciple, even as he sidelined those who opposed him. Trotsky was expelled, exiled, and eventually assassinated in Mexico years later. Stalin emerged as the new ruler of the Soviet Union. Under Stalin, communism took a darker, more authoritarian turn. He launched the first five-year plan in 1928, aiming to industrialize the Soviet Union at breakneck speed. Giant factories, dams, and steel plants rose from the ground. The countryside was forcibly collectivized. Small farms merged into state-run collectives. Peasants who resisted were labeled enemies of the state. Famine swept through Ukraine and other regions, killing millions. Stalin's rule created a paradox. On one hand, the USSR transformed from a backward agrarian society into an industrial superpower. On the other, it became a totalitarian state ruled by fear. The secret police, purges, and gulags silenced dissent. Even party members who had fought beside Lenin were executed during the Great Terror of the 1930s. Still, the Soviet Union's rise could not be denied. It survived the Nazi invasion during World War II, rebuilt its cities from ashes, and became one of the two superpowers of the 20th century. The red flag that once flew over the Winter Palace now flew over Berlin in 1945. The Russian Revolution had succeeded in one sense. It had destroyed monarchy, challenged capitalism, and created a new world order. But it also left behind a legacy of contradiction, liberation and oppression, idealism and brutality. Communism, born from the dream of equality, spread across the world. China, Cuba, Vietnam, and dozens of nations adopted it in one form or another. To millions, it represented hope, the promise of a world without exploitation. To others, it symbolized tyranny and control. But no one could deny that it reshaped the 20th century. The story of the Russian Revolution is not just about politics or ideology. It's about people. The peasants who burned their landlords' estates. The factory workers who seized control of machines. The soldiers who refused to fight in a war they didn't believe in. The thinkers, the dreamers, and the martyrs who believed they could build a new world. For a brief moment they did. But history is not kind to revolutions. The same fire that destroys oppression can also consume freedom. What began as a cry for equality became a system of fear. Yet the revolution's ideas of justice, collective power, and defiance of inequality still echo in movements around the world today. Over a century later, the Russian Revolution remains one of the most extraordinary transformations in human history. It began with bread riots and ended with nuclear weapons. It toppled an empire, built another, and defined the global balance of power for generations. And it all started with a simple promise: peace, land, and bread. Thank you for watching. If you liked this deep dive, share with friends who love history. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more fascinating historical insights.